We have the privilege this morning of hearing from Rabbi Weil. Rabbi Weil. Oh, I'm sorry. Before we begin, I'm going to make an announcement which I know sounds obvious, but sometimes is not as intuitive as it seems. If anybody, and can everyone just hold up your cell phones for a minute? Hold up your cell phones. Hold them up high so everyone can see them. All of you hold up your cell phones. More of you. Come on. There's 250 students this week, 250 cell phones held up. Okay, now while your phone is still over your head, take your second hand. Take your second hand and power off your cell phone while it's still over your head. So we can all see it done. And then put it under your chair. Power it off, now put it under your chair. There is no cell phones. I'm reminding you that your teachers are taking attendance this morning. And teachers who see students using cell phones or other devices will confiscate them as if it was in the middle of their own class. We have the privilege this morning of having as a visitor to our school Rabbi Weil. Rabbi Weil is the managing director of the Orthodox Union. In addition to being the managing director of the Orthodox Union, if you think that's impressive, he's also the husband of our very own Mrs. Weil. And he's also the father of our very dear freshman student, Atara Weil. So we're very grateful that they're sharing Rabbi Weil with us this morning. Rabbi Weil, amongst his many accomplishments, has significant experience both in communal leadership as a shul rabbi and in leadership positions throughout the Orthodox world. We invited him this morning to help hopefully share some clarity in some of the issues that are facing our community currently, as well as to share some perspectives that we can glean from the heroes of the Jewish past. It is with great pleasure that we introduce Rabbi Weil.
Good morning, everyone. Bershus, Mrs. Kahan, Rabbi Prince, all of the Rabbeim in the Morot here. It's an honor to be here. Guys, this year, we celebrated the 40th anniversary of an event that changed the world. Let me ask you something. Did Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu, was he at your July 4th barbecue? Yeah? I don't think so. Because I gotta tell you this, he wasn't at my July 4th barbecue. And in fact, you know what? On July 4th, he wasn't even in Israel. He's the Prime Minister of the State of Israel. You know where he was on July 4th? What do you think? Kampala, Uganda, in sub-Saharan Africa. What was he doing there? He was there in Kampala, Uganda, to commemorate and to mourn one of the greatest events that has shaped our generation. And that's what I want to talk about today. Our Maccabees. What Menachem Begin, the former Prime Minister of Israel, referred to is the modern-day Maccabees, the modern-day Hashmonaim. And I'll tell you where we're going to start this story. We're not going to start on July 4th, 1976. We're going to go back a little bit. If you ask your parents when you come home tonight, Israel in particular, but the Jewish world, we were in a depression, in a terrible malaise, because of two events that happened to us. The Munich massacres, in which in front of the eyes of the world, the Israeli Olympians and their coaches were taken and were slaughtered by Palestinian terrorists. And then, less than a year later, the Yom Kippur War. And that we can only blame on ourselves, because Israeli intelligence had been warning that the nations of Egypt and Syria were not just having military buildups, they were not just going through maneuvers, but they were planning for a war. And the generals, to the man of the general staff of the State of Israel, there's a lot of hubris and arrogance. After what happened in the Six-Day War, they said, they won't touch us. There's no way. They're afraid of us. And when did they wait to attack? On Yom Kippur, when soldiers were home for their bases, everyone was in shul. That led, even though Israel survived the Yom Kippur War, almost did not survive. There were 2 or 3 days we weren't sure that there was going to be a state of Israel. The Syrians, they had broken through. They could have cut off the whole north. They could have gone right to Haifa. They had a clear path to cut off the whole northern part of Israel. What happened? We lost 2,500 young boys. 2,500 Jews that did not have to die. Those deaths were for naught. They never said goodbye to their mother. The sirens went, they were in shul on Yom Kippur, and they had to rush to the front. They went to their death. And what happened was, for the next 2-3 years, all the Jewish world did was we beat ourselves up. How could we have allowed this to happen? How could have we been so arrogant and not looked at the intelligence that stared us in the face? The Prime Minister of Israel, Golda Meir, the first female Prime Minister of the State of Israel, she had to resign because of her failures. The general staff, almost to a man, had to resign because of their failures. And we, the Jewish world, were in depression. We were in a malaise. That is the background of where we're going to start our story. There's a couple today who live not far from here in Borough Park. Their name is George and Rivka, or George and Renee Carfunkel. At the time, they were a young couple. Both children of survivors. They were living the dream that only their grandparents could dream or hallucinate about. They were going to visit the Holy Land, go to the Kotel, go to Yerushalayim, to Israel. And they went on a vacation. It was a fascinating week. It was a magic week. When would they have a chance to leave their work in New York? It was 1976. You couldn't just get on a plane all the time. It wasn't so simple to go to Israel in 76. When could they do it again? So they felt, on the way back, instead of going straight to New York, they're going to go to the famous European city, Paris. And that's where we start our story. Sunday morning, June 27th, Ben Gurion Airport. In those days in Ben Gurion, very serious security like there is today, but you know what happened? First your luggage, first your cargo had to go through scanning, and it went through. Only afterwards did you go to the gate. So they get to the Air France counter on Sunday morning. They're going to be taking a direct flight from Tel Aviv to Paris. And George looks up and he grabs her niece. Look at that. It's not going direct. It says it's stopping in Athens. Air France Flight 139 is going to be stopping in Athens. We're not going there. No way. Everyone knows the worst security in all of Europe is Athens Airport. I'm not going through there. The woman behind the Air France counter says, "Excuse me, sir. Excuse me. You want to go direct to Paris? There's no direct flight till Monday night." And let me just tell you one other thing. We cannot pull your valises, your luggage, out of the cargo hold. So you either go through Athens or don't, but your cargo is going to be going that way. They look at each other. They were only going to spend 2 days in Paris. They were going to go to the Louvre, see the Eiffel Tower, spend 2 days, and then go back to work in New York. What are we going to do? They hem, they haw. What can they do without their cargo, their valises? They didn't have a place in Israel. All right, they decide to go. The flight takes off. From Israel to Athens is nothing. It's like going from here to DC. Quick flight, no problems. 58 new passengers get on Air France Flight 139 in Athens. For our purposes, we're interested in 4 of them. Two Germans, members of the infamous Baader-Meinhof gang. Baader-Meinhof was a terrible terrorist gang. They were anti-establishment, anti-capitalism, anti-world order, and they partnered with different terrorist gangs to bring down the world order. And in the liberal progressive world in Germany at that time, there was a lot of good feeling for Baader-Meinhof. Two Germans. One is a woman by the name of Brigitte Kuhlmann. The second is a man by the name of Wilfried. In English we would say like Bose speakers, but there's an umlaut. If you've studied German, the 2 dots over the 0, so it's pronounced Bös, Wilfried Bös. So Willy Bös and Brigitte Kuhlmann get on. 2 others, 2 Palestinian terrorists who were very smart. Their origin was Bahrain. In Bahrain, there was no security in 1976. And what happens? With their hand luggage, in their vests, they have guns. They have grenades. And they get on in Bahrain. Now you get off in Athens. Inter-airport, there was no security in 76, right? They got off from the gate, the plane that landed from Bahrain. They travel in Athens to the Air France flight 139 gate that's going to Paris. They meet their comrades. They sit in first class. They hand each other guns. They hand each other weapons. As the plane takes off and it hits flying altitude, they rush the cockpit. They rush the cockpit. They commandeer the plane. At that moment, the plane goes on radio silence. Already bad news, because there's a ton of Israelis on this. Word gets back to Israel. If a plane goes on radio silence, it's one of two things. Neither is good. Either it's crashed or it's been hijacked and commandeered. The first time in his life that George saw a gun was when Brigitte Kuhlman comes, slams her gun into his chest, says, "Get out of this seat!" She rips all the men out of the aisle, and they put women in the aisle seats because they feel there's less of a chance that women will try to jump them. The men are against the window in the middle seats. Everyone's told, now we want your identity. We want your passports, your identity. There's a former Air Force colonel on this plane, Israeli Air Force. He realizes if they see that, he'll be dead. What does he do? He rips up his military, his Air Force identity, and he literally swallows it. They don't know where it's going. The plane lands, and what they find out is Benghazi, Libya. The leader of Libya at that time, Muammar Gaddafi, a great fan of Palestinian terrorists, a great enemy of the West. He allows them to refuel, to get supplies on the plane. They're sitting there in the heat. You know, it's July, it's June in Benghazi. That seems to be for hours. The plane takes off. The plane is traveling now. It's already Sunday evening. It becomes dark, Sunday night. They don't know where they're going. It seems forever. They land. All they can see outside the windows are black soldiers. They have no clue where they are. All they see is black soldiers. When they get off the plane, a roll call is done. A roll call. We, as Jews, we refer to it as a selexia. 89 of the passengers who had Israeli passports are quarantined. 4 who did not have Israeli passports but are conspicuous-looking Jews. George, who had a yarmulke on his head, and his wife Renee. 2 Jews, young Sephardic men from São Paulo, Brazil, who had kippot. Those 4 are quarantined with the Israelis. All other passengers are put into a different area. It is now Monday a.m., 28th. The world finds out what has happened. Baader Meinhof, in conjunction with the PFLP, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, has commandeered this plane, and we'll talk about why they took this plane, of all places, to Entebbe Airport in Kampala, Uganda. We'll discuss that in a minute. They make their demand. $5 million United States cash, and 53 of our comrades, 40 Palestinians held by the Zionists in Zionist prisons in Israel, 6 Palestinians held by the Jordanians, 6 members of Baader Meinhof, including Baader himself, the head of the gang, the head of the terrorist gang, held by West Germans in West German prisons. Apologize, I forgot the 53rd. But 40 in Israel, 6 in Jordan, 6 in West Germany. The world now is focused on Israel. Just to answer the question we asked, why did they take this plane all the way to sub-Saharan Africa, to Uganda? 2 reasons. In 1974, the PFLP hijacked another plane. A Belgian airline, Sabena Airlines, Boeing 707. And they took it to Tel Aviv, and they made similar threats. There was a group that every one of you today knows its name, In 1976 and in 1974, it was classified. None of us knew what it was. It was a group known as Sayeret Matkal. Sayeret Matkal, special elite anti-terror units of the army. And it was headed by a man whose name was classified. He went on to become the most storied soldier in the history of the IDF. He went on to become the prime minister of the state of Israel. It was a young man by the name of Ehud Barak. Barak and the Sayeret dressed up as the maintenance crew. The guys who come onto the plane to clean the toilets, to take, the fluid from the toilets, the guys who come to bring the supplies onto the plane. In these uniforms, and miraculously, they were able to stop the terrorists and free the hostages. The PFLP, headed by a Palestinian by the name of George Chabash, he says, we're not making that mistake again. We're going to take, when we hijack it, we're going to take it as far away as we can. And why did they go to Athens? Because they knew Athens had the worst security of any airport in Europe. And we're going to take it as far away from Israel as we can. Do you know that Uganda was 3,800 kilometers? An impossible mission. Why Uganda as opposed to some other country? We mentioned Golda Meir. Before Golda Meir became Prime Minister of the State of Israel, she was the foreign minister. You guys, through your Morot and your Rabbeim, you learn about two principles. The Jews being an Or Lagoyim, Tikkun Olam. You know what Golda Meir wanted to fulfill that? They had developed in Israel something known as drip technology. They made the desert bloom without any water, by just drip, drip on the roots of different trees and plants. She sent Israeli water engineers throughout the African continent. Africans were dying of starvation, and she sent Israeli water engineers already in the late 1950s to help them feed their people. Israel was beloved in Africa. And something happened in 1972. OPEC. Google the word OPEC, the oil-producing economic countries. What happened? They had an embargo against Israel, and they jacked up the price of oil. It caused a tremendous gas lines here in the United States. It created a recession in the United States for President Richard Nixon. And what happened was the OPEC, the oil nations, which were primarily Arab and Venezuela, Arab nations in Venezuela, the Arabs went to these black African nations, and they said, look, throw the Israelis out, we'll give you oil, we'll supply you oil, and not only that, we have connections with the Russians. We'll get you Russian armaments. A dictator, one of the most vicious men that ever lived in the 20th century, Idi Amin Dada. Who is Idi Amin Dada? He was a military man who overthrew the government. He murdered 300,000 of his own Ugandans. 300,000 of his fellow black Ugandans he murdered. He was a terrible man. He threw the Israelis out in 1972. He was a great supporter of the Palestinians. What was his story? He took them up on the deal. The Russians gave him MiG jets, so he now had an air force. He had Russian equipment. And he was a willing partner, willing to work with the Palestinians. That's why they went to Uganda. Now, in the history of the State of Israel, it was a very brief history from 1948 to 1976. One principle that the government always had: we don't negotiate with terrorists. We're not going to be like other nations. We don't negotiate with terrorists. What happened? The family members of the 89 Israelis, they were sitting there pleading. They were protesting, as were others. Go back to the Yom Kippur War. Just last year in 1975, what did you do? You traded Egyptian soldiers for body bags, for the remains of our boys who were killed in 1973. You're willing to trade with the Egyptians? They're Muslim Arabs who want to destroy us. They're a nation that's committed to our annihilation. But because they're a sovereign nation, you'll trade with them? The Palestinians, who are also committed to our annihilation, you won't deal with them? These are live beings. If you traded for dead bodies, why wouldn't you trade for that's my wife, that's my children, that's my parent. And what happened? Filmed on Israeli TV, the relatives, outside the prime minister's office, Yitzhak Rabin was prime minister, they literally broke down the gate. Imagine breaking down the gates of the White House and then running through the lawn into the house. That he wasn't there. He was meeting in Tel Aviv with the cabinet. But this was all filmed on Israeli TV. They had no credible military plan. One plan came up, we'll send 1,000 soldiers. And they said, what are you talking about? 1,000 soldiers you're going to send to Kampala, Uganda? Yeah. 1,000 Israeli soldiers will be able to take over the capital city. But in the meantime, all the hostages will be dead. They had another idea. We'll do a surprise amphibious assault. Because if you look at the map, the border of Uganda and Kenya, the border is Lake Victoria. The capital city at Kampala and Entebbe Airport are very close to Lake Victoria. We'll come through the lake. There's only one little problem. In America, unless you're a 2-year-old infant, the alligators at Disney don't eat people. They try to avoid people. In Lake Victoria, there's a different species known as a crocodile. Crocodiles are aggressive. You're going to send our best soldiers, and they'll be literally eaten in the lake before they get out. We had nothing. We had no credible plan. Israel, for the first time in its history, Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, Defense Minister Shimon Peres, you know Shimon Peres, who just passed away this year, and the other name you must know is General Matagur, the head of the IDF. Remember this name, General Matagur. He is famous to you because he's one of the heroes of the Six-Day War. He's one of the heroes of the conquest of Yerushalayim. He was one of the few people who didn't make the mistake in Yom Kippur. He became the head of the IDF. So these are the three players: Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, Defense Minister Shimon Peres, and General Matagur. And together with the cabinet, they make a decision, and the world is looking at Israel to negotiate with the terrorists. The next day, Wednesday, June 30th, like only the New York Post can do, 2 words, big, black, bold letters, the New York Post: Israel surrenders. Israel surrenders. The last country that had stood up to terrorism is now given in. Now, when that happened, the terrorists, and what I've forgotten to tell, well, I'll tell you in a sec. The terrorists did 2 things. Number 1, they called Air France, bring in another plane. Air France had a plane waiting in Nairobi, Kenya. Nairobi, Kenya from here is like going to Philadelphia. By air, it's nothing. They brought in another plane. They released all of the other hostages, 160 hostages, French, Americans, British, except for who? They kept the Israelis, the Jews, the 93. He's still alive today. He's 92 years old, and he's one of the heroes of this story. David Pardue, who was the pilot of the Air France flight, he said, the captain stays with the ship. And if it means the captain goes down with the ship, we're not leaving. His people didn't want to do this. Many of the flight attendants didn't want to do this, but he said, we stay till the last hostage is released. So there's 105 hostages, 93 Jews, and 12 members of the Air France flight. When all of the other hostages land in Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris, you know who they're greeted by? They're not allowed to see their families yet. Who are the first people that greet them? French intelligence and the Mossad. The Mossad conducts on Wednesday a series of interviews. And based upon 130 interviews, they come up with the following intelligence. And this is where it gets interesting. One piece of intelligence is very positive and very good. The second piece of intelligence is terrible. It is abysmal. It is horrific. What's the good intelligence? All along, the terrorists have said, don't get smart with us. Israel, don't you play your games with us. The place is booby-trapped. Anybody plays anything smart, anyone tries anything on us, the whole place is going up with us in it and with all of your hostages. It was clear to them with 95% certainty that after the interviews, the place was not really booby-trapped. There would be the potential for a military raid. That's the good news. Number two, this is not for terrorists. There were 3 other Palestinians waiting for them when they got there. And the Palestinians stay in the VIP lounge on the first floor. There are always 2 terrorists guarding each main entrance. One on the east side of the building, one on the west side. The other 3 sleep. So there's 7 terrorists. And here's where it gets bad. Idi Amin all along was saying, I can't do anything. They showed up. My soldiers can't, they'll blow up all the hostages. They'll kill all the hostages. I can't do anything. Lie. They were, and they didn't know exactly. It turned out it was 100. But they guessed somewhere between 80 and 120 Ugandan soldiers. This is not an anti-terror move. This is a military operation. You're dealing with 100 soldiers, all of them quartered on the 2nd floor of the terminal. Because where were the hostages being held? The old terminal of Entebbe Airport. So you've got the 7 terrorists, and you've got tens of Ugandan soldiers quartered on the 2nd floor. This is not an anti-terror operation. And then you've got, in the towers, you've got Ugandan soldiers. You've got Ugandan soldiers in the new terminal. But with that information, at least they could do something. And here is where the hashgacha, here's where the hand of the Almighty comes in. Listen to these events. Any of you guys ever heard the phrase, a pat rack? You know, somebody who can't throw anything out. They save every piece of newspaper, every test. What happened? Before the Israelis were thrown out of Uganda, there was a firm, an Israeli building firm, construction firm. They were given the architectural blueprint of what would become the Entebbe Airport. And what happened? They didn't get the job. Entebbe Airport was built by an Italian building firm. But he saved every architectural blueprint that he ever bid on. He had it in his files. He gives this to the IDF. Now you know what? Now we can at least create a Hollywood set, and now we have a chance of having a military operation. We know where based upon discussing with the hostages that were released, we know where the entrances are. They're the same as they are in the architectural blueprint. The VIP lounge, there's been no structural change to the terminal. Fantastic. We at least have a chance. We know what we're dealing with. Number 2, remember there has to be the element of surprise. The hostages tell them, every time that Idi Amin has showed up to meet with the hostages, to meet with the terrorists, how has he shown up? The following motorcade. He drives in a black Mercedes stretch limousine with a Ugandan flag, followed by 2 Range Rovers of his elite soldiers. That's the surprise. One little problem. They went to the Department of Motor Vehicles. There's not one black stretch Mercedes limousine in the whole state of Israel. All the closest thing they could find, sorry about the shower there, the closest thing they could find was an older version, white stretch Mercedes limousine that an Arab had in the east part of Yerushalayim. What are they going to do? Going to go tell him we're looking into doing some raid? You know what they did? They went in with the following story. We're filming a movie. We've got the camera crews, the actors, the directors. It's costing us a fortune. We need a car. We might have to tweak it a little bit. We're willing to pay whatever you ask for. We're willing to pay for it. Would it be okay if we could have this car for a week or so? He laughs at them. He says, this piece of garbage? He says, whatever you give me, he says, take it. He says, don't rush giving it back to me. They had no clue what he was talking about. The car was it didn't work. They had to bring in a special Mercedes, mechanic. And then they had to quarantine this poor mechanic from his family because they didn't want anybody knowing what he was doing. He put in an alternator, it didn't work. He had to put in a starter, it didn't work. They tried a practice run Friday night, the car didn't start. Had to put in a second starter. But at least they had the element of surprise. Number three. There's a guy, and if you Google him, you'll be able to read interviews of him. He's today still very involved in the Israeli Air Force. He was a young guy at the time, 25 years old. His name was Shuki Yehoshua, Shuki Shani. He was a child of survivors. So what his involvement in the Israeli Air Force meant a lot to him. He had just come back from Georgia with a group of elite Air Force pilots. What was he doing in Georgia? Israel, for the first time, procured, and I'm going to use a little Yiddish, these monster, huge mamazetzers, something called the Hercules C-130. Today, many of your parents in their stock portfolio own a stock by the name of Lockheed Martin. At that time, Martin Marietta, based in its plant in Georgia, produced these monster cargo planes. You could move hundreds of soldiers with them. You could move tanks. You could move trucks with them. This was the way that they could do what? They could go 3,800 miles, use all the equipment, all the soldiers, and they could fly to where? To Uganda. They had just spent months in Georgia learning how to fly the Hercules C-130. So Matagor comes to him. Young man, you had a good time down in Georgia. You like them Georgia peaches, huh? That's Southern hospitality. They treat you well, huh? Y'all did learn how to fly them Hercules C-130. Oh, yeah. And these kids, they don't know what he's done. Hey, yes, we did. And General, we can do it. Up. He says, boys, I just got two little questions for you. You're going to fly these things under radar. You know the kind of fuel you're going to burn? Exactly how do you think we're going to get these things home? I'm going to take my elite soldiers. We're going to try a commando raid, and you're not going to be able to fly this thing home. Silence. So we're going to have to solve that problem. Problem number 2. Boys, what do you expect? The lights are going to be on in Entebbe Airport, and they're going to be blasting Hava Nagila, Shalom Aleichem, welcome to the Israeli Air Force? Did you guys in Georgia learn how to land these things in the dark? Silence. Now this is where you talk about Yiddish Seichel, the Yiddish Akal, Jewish ingenuity comes in. Yoshua Shani takes these boys, we're supposed to fly these things, and he says, General, could we come back to you? They come up with the following, you talk about ingenious. They said, one thing we know is this. We've seen on radar that radar over water, those of you in the STEM program probably study these things. Radar over water, it looks like that. It bounces a certain way. Radar over sand bounces another way. And then radar over an area which is dense in concrete bounces off another way. Well, when we land, if we do this miracle raid, when we land, we know that there's Lake Victoria, which is water. There's sand all around. But the tarmac of the airport is more concrete. And we can do it off of radar. So they come back to the general. And they said, we think we could land these things in the dark. What happened? Matagor smiles. He says, I'll believe it when I see it. It's Thursday. We're going to Sharm el-Sheikh. At that time, the southernmost point in Israel. It's not like today, not Eilat, but Sharm el-Sheikh. That has very similar terrain. There's water all around. There's sand all around. And then in the middle, there's a concrete, dense surface, the tarmac that you're going to land a plane on. I'm going to sit in the cockpit with you. Let's see you do it. What happened? The 4 pilots, they've got 4 of these Hercules. They go to Sharm el-Sheikh. He's sitting with Shuki Shani in the cockpit, flying in the dark, flying totally in the dark, because that's what it's going to be like, following his radar, Looks like the radar bouncing off the sand here and bouncing off the water here, and oh, look at different radar there. That must be the tarmac. He comes, he turns on his lights with about 40 meters to the ground. Oh my God, it's a fence post. He pulls up that monster plane, almost killed the general of the army, Montagur. Montagur leans over to him and says, kid, he says, turn this thing around and get it right the second time. He turns around, goes back, in the dark, thinks he's got it this time. Same thing, turns on the lights with 35, 40 meters to go. This time he got it. The other 3 planes landed, they got it. This is the first time all week that the General Montagur, and he's the one that they respect in the cabinet, it's the first time all week that he says, we have a shot. I'm willing to give a shot of a military move. Why? Because the negotiations were going nowhere. Israel said, we will trade of the 40 Palestinians, we'll trade those who do not have Jewish blood on their hands. We will not release a prisoner if he's killed an innocent person, if he's got Jewish blood on his hands. And the terrorists said back to them, you don't make the terms, we make the terms here. It's those 40 or we start killing your hostages. What happened? What happened? Idi Amin, you talk about all these little incidences, Hashgacha working. Idi Amin was serving as the president of the Union of African Nations. It's a 2-year rotating term. And guess what? His term is up that weekend. On Thursday, July 1st, which was the initial deadline was we're going to kill all the hostages at Thursday, July 1st, noon. Once Israel said they would negotiate, Idi Amin had them switch the deadline to July 4th, Sunday, July 4th at 8 a.m. Why Sunday, July 4th? Because he's going to be in Mauritius. Mauritius is now taking over as the president of the Union of African Nations. All African leaders are there for the conference. He doesn't want anything happening while he's gone, while he's not in front of the cameras, while he's not a player. So he convinces the Palestinians and the Baader Meinhof, we're going to delay it to July 4th. He doesn't come back till Saturday afternoon, Shabbos, July 3rd. What happened? Why July 4th? You know why July 4th? This is a question not for the students, because I don't expect you to know this, but for the teachers. What was July 4th, 1976? The bicentennial of the United States of America. The whole world for 6 months had focused on the bicentennial of the United States of America. Do you know the Queen of England, Queen Elizabeth herself, the very country we revolted from, she's going to be there with President Gerald R. Ford. The heads of every major state, of Germany, of France, of every European, of every major country with the exception of Russia, they were all going to be in the United States to celebrate the 200th anniversary of the United States of America. And Idi Amin is going to take the limelight away from them. He's going to have the show not on New York and Washington, but on Uganda. What happened? We didn't answer a question. Even if it works, and they get to Uganda by flying under radar, because they don't want to go over enemy territory like Egypt and Libya, how are you going to get the hostages home 3,800 kilometers? There was one black African nation that they still had good relations with. One moral nation that didn't sell its soul to the oil and didn't sell its soul to the Russians. You know who that was? Uganda's next door neighbor, Kenya. And Kenya hated Idi Amin. Idi Amin had tried to foment revolt in Kenya. So Israel called 2 ministers that they felt they could have secrecy with and they could trust. They called up the Kenyans and they said, look, the negotiations are going nowhere. We're, God forbid, going to lose over 100 lives. We think we have no choice but to attempt a military operation. What happened? What happened? The only way it could work, we've got to stop in Nairobi and refuel. It's the only chance we have. Would you allow us just to come in for 2 hours, take our wounded, off. We'll have Israeli doctors there. We'll have Israeli medical people there. And just to refuel, and then the planes will go off. Silence on the other end of the phone. Silence. And they said, do you understand what you're asking? We'll get back to you. 3.5 hours later, the phone rings. 2 conditions. Number 1, we're not telling the president of Kenya about this because it'll be dead in the water. There's no way he'll allow it. 2 conditions. Number 1, you didn't call us. We didn't have this conversation because there's no way that we can be, it has to be you told us you sent the head of El Al in Kenya, Nairobi, and he's claiming that there's a flight coming in from South Africa with mechanical problems. So you made a whole story. What were we going to do when you guys landed? It was humanitarian. You didn't call us. We knew nothing about it in advance. Okay, no problem. Israel said, we agree to that 100%. Condition number 2. On the tarmac in Uganda, which is literally about a 2.5-minute flight for these MiG jets, he's got 11 MiG jets. I don't care what kind of story we tell. Humanitarian, we had no choice, we had to help, they landed with sick people. Idi Amin, we know him. The vengeance he'll take on us. We don't have an air force. He can destroy, he can blow up our capital city with those MiG jets. Here's the condition. When you're there rescuing the hostages, you blow up, you take out every one of those MiG jets. You take out his air force. What choice did Israel have? Yes, we accept the second condition. Now, this is not just a military operation. Now you've got to literally have these RPGs mounted on Humvees, and you've got to blow up 11 Air Force jets. This is not a hostage operation anymore. What choice did they have? In order to work with the Kenyans, now that the Kenyans were involved, they sent the head of the mission, Ehud Barak, to Kenya. He's taken off the mission that he is running. And who do they call up? A good friend of his, a man who was about to finish his tour of duty in the army, in the Sayeret Matkal, was about to announce his engagement to his girlfriend Beria, and they would have gotten married within the year. Who was this man? No one knows his name because it's classified. His father was the preeminent historian of the Inquisition of Spanish Jewry. The Inquisition, which lasted 300 years into parts of France, parts of Italy, other Spanish-controlled areas throughout Europe. A famous professor had been a visiting professor at Harvard, at Penn, at Cornell, Ben Zion Netanyahu. And one of the times that he was a visiting professor after his oldest son, Yonatan, this young man, Yonatan, after his first tour of duty in the army, applied to Harvard University, was accepted, graduated with a philosophy degree. After his degree from Harvard, went back to Israel to join the Sayeret. Another time when Professor Netanyahu had come to America, his second son, Bibi, Benjamin, had applied for an engineering degree at MIT and was accepted. He as well, at that time, was actually still in America in 1976. And what happened? Yoni, Netanyahu, was called up from the Negev, where he was leading a group, and he was told, you're going to be running this mission. A mission that had yet to be approved, but you're going to run this thing. This is Thursday. Thursday night, they bring down the top unit in the army, the Tzanchanim, the paratroopers from the Golan Heights. They say, boys, go to sleep, because you're going to wake up early tomorrow morning, and you're not going to get much sleep over the next couple of days. Friday morning, everyone is woken up. The new head of this mission, Yonatan Netanyahu, and his squad commanders come up with a plan. And they go through it, and they prepare it. They've got 1 day to implement this thing. Tonight, We're going to make a very quick kiddush. Tonight is going to be a practice run. And Friday night, they have a practice run with the planes landing. And keep in mind one fact, guys. From the point where the planes land, it's the new terminal of Entebbe, the new Entebbe terminal. It is literally 1 kilometer, 0.62 miles to get where? To where the hostages are in the old terminal. The goal is 60 minutes. The goal, not more than 25 dead, including soldiers and hostages. The definition of success is if more than 24 hostages and soldiers are killed, this is a debacle. Less than that, it's still an acceptable price in a mission. That was what they had determined. Why? I can't tell you. I don't know myself why that was the cutoff point. They do a practice run. It's horrific. It is an absolute mess. Well, guys, you not only got all the hostages killed, you not only had no surprise, you got yourselves killed. Not only did the car not start, everything went wrong on this practice mission, done in central Israel on Tel Nof Air Force Base, with the Hollywood set of the Entebbe terminal. They sent all the soldiers back to sleep. Yoni stays with the squad commanders, and they stay up till like 4, 5 in the morning Friday night. And they tweak the plan. They look at everything that went wrong, what they did wrong, and they made a number of changes. They report back to Matagur with the changes. We think this can work. We believe it can work. What happens? The only way they can do this, guys, is if they take off from central Israel 11:30 Shabbos morning, July 3rd. It's the only way it can happen. Why? Because the element of surprise means they have to come in on the tail of the last commercial airliner that's going to be landing in Entebbe on Saturday night. Remember, the deadline is Sunday morning. The element of surprise means we'll come late Saturday night when hopefully some of the soldiers and some of the terrorists are asleep. They can't fly the way you and I fly, because going over across Africa, Egypt, Libya, the Sudan, these are all enemy nations. They have to fly under radar. They have to go in a circuitous route. They have to go through the Yam Suf, right? The Yam Suf, the Reed Sea. The one country they think that doesn't have anti-aircraft that won't shoot them down from the sky is Eritrea. So they go through the Yam Suf, which is international territory, through Eritrea. That's not at all the straight way to go there. They can come over Kenya. Kenya will allow them. And then they'll land in Uganda. The Security Cabinet has not made any decision. It's Shabbos day. They have no choice. They take off at 11:30. Fly under radar, because there are Russian ships in the Mediterranean. They don't want them to see 4 big planes traveling together. They all travel separately. They land in the southernmost part of Israel. Remember, not like today, as we said. Sharm el-Sheikh is at least closer to Uganda. It's much further south than Eilat. They refuel in Sharm el-Sheikh. They take off by 3:30. No approval. It's 8 hours. We have to land, remember, on the tail of the British Airways flight, the last commercial flight they had from intelligence is going to land. It's around midnight. No approval. At this point, they're on radio silence. One word. It's a one word that they will hear. At 5:30 p.m., it took till 5:30 p.m. Shabbos, July 3rd, the code word comes through. They can't even talk amongst themselves. The 4 planes, they had to take turns flying up, side by side next to each other just to let them know that we're here. They're on radio silence. You know what they're doing? They're flying like 120, 130 feet off the water. There's none. For 8 hours, radio silence. Guys are puking, they're spilling their guts up. You know what it's like flying that low? The turbulence. They've got everything bolted in. They've got the trucks bolted in. They've got the RPGs on the Humvees bolted in. They've got IV bags because the soldiers, are becoming dehydrated from throwing up because of the turbulence. So they're giving each other fluids. It's a long 8 hours. It's getting close. The border between Kenya and Uganda, as we said before, was Lake Victoria. Any of you guys ever go? Have you ever been to a camp by a lakeside? You know what lake effects are? There's a huge lightning and thunderstorm over Lake Victoria. Shuki Shani says, I didn't know if we were going to forget whether the mission would be successful. I didn't know if we were going to be struck by lightning. It was terrible. The planes were shaking. Everything was jolting. Thank God. When they got off of Lake Victoria, it was localized. The storm was over the lake. It was a lake effect. When they got out of the Lake Victoria into Uganda, a few minutes from the airport, things quieted down. For the first plane, the lights were still on. He's able to land not in the dark. He stops the plane on the runway, and the guys get out and they put these battery-operated lights. So that way, when planes 2, 3, and 4 will land, at least there'll be battery-operated lights. They'll see something on the runway. Because what happened was the Ugandans did shut off all the lights when they realized what was happening. He pulls the plane up to the new terminal. Before he even comes to a full stop, he drops the bow of the plane. This time the Mercedes starts. Yoni is there. They took guys out of the Mercedes. They took guys out of the Range Rovers. They realized they were too crowded in. That means they're going to have to do the mission with less soldiers, but at least they'll have flexibility. That was one of the changes. They go. They're off. It's a kilometer, guys. It's 0.62 miles. Now, they changed from Friday night. Another change they made. We can't, if it means we're killed, if it means we take bullets, we cannot get into a gunfight with the Ugandans. It's all about the element of surprise. It's all about getting there without noise and gunfights, and it may mean that some of us are going to die. They had vests on. Some of them had bulletproof vests. And what happened? Things are going well. The first half kilometer, it's moving. The other guys in the first plane, they go into the first terminal, the new terminal. Because even if we're successful freeing the hostages, the Ugandans control the new terminal. So they get into a firefight. One of them is one of the people I interviewed for this talk, Surin Hershko. He took a bullet in the back in the new terminal from a Ugandan soldier. He's been a quadriplegic the last 40 years. You know what that means? The man has not been able to feed himself, to clean himself. He's been like an infant the last 40 years. He's got a Filipino aide who has to do everything for him. But he and the Tzanchanim made sure that they took care and that they secured the new terminal. Yoni's off. About halfway between the new and the old terminal, what happens? 2 Ugandan soldiers. They said, wait a second. Idi Amin had been there this afternoon. Why is he coming back after midnight? It didn't make any sense. Stop for a second. What happened? On Friday in the terminal, I want to talk about the hostages for just a minute. On Friday, things were bad. Actually, they knew it was the meat. It wasn't done on purpose, but the meat was tainted with E. coli bacteria. It was bad. How did they know that? Because those that kept kosher did not suffer from diarrhea. But everyone who had eaten the meat, terrible diarrhea. And the problem was this was an old terminal that wasn't in use. Not all the toilets were working in the women's room or the men's room. It was really bad. No one had taken a shower since Sunday morning. They had water to clean their hands and their face. There was an elderly woman, Dora Bloch, 73 years old. Today, 73 is a spring chicken. We'll just allow you first to get a drink and get a driver's license. In 76, when you were 73, it was not a young person. She was going with her son, Ilan Hartouv, one of the people I interviewed. She was going to London. They were going to go through Paris to London for her other son's wedding. She was going to go for a chasana on July 4th. They were going to spend a week in London preparing. She choked on a piece of meat on Friday. And there's a Ugandan doctor there. They can't get it out. I mean, she's breathing through the nose, but she's not breathing properly. He says, we got to get her to the airport, to the hospital. They took Dora Bloch to the hospital. In the hospital, within 20 minutes, they took the piece of meat out. She was fine. Shabbos morning. The nurses, the doctors are ready to release her. The Ugandan Minister of Health, who despised and hated Idi Amin, but was scared to death of him, he got in there, he doctors her papers, and keeps her in. Why? What am I going to do? We're going to send her back to the airport to get her killed tomorrow morning at the deadline with the other hostages? Let's keep her here and we'll keep her safe. Shabbos afternoon, Idi Amin comes back from the African conference in Mauritius. And he meets with the terrorists, then he speaks to the hostages. Cameras are on. Every time he had come, 3 previous times to speak to the hostages, what had everybody been told? When you address him Field Marshal, General, President for life, Dr. Idi Amin Dada, Lord of the lions and master of the fish. There was a young woman, one of the hostages in her 20s. She didn't remember. She says, President Amin. His eyes were about to pop out. What did you say to me? When you speak to me, you address me as Field Marshal, General, President for life, Dr. Idi Amin Dada, Lord of the Lions, Master of the Fish. Do you understand? I watched an interview with her 12 years after this, in 1988. She was in trauma, describing what happened to her. So George raised his hand. And he, of course, after this, was going to address him properly. I'm not going to go through the whole Chad Gadya, Field Marshal, General for life, etc. He said the following. George asked him this question. You've said how furious you are at America. I'm an American citizen. I promise, I know you're going to do everything you can to save us and to bring us back home safely. When you do that, I will go to my government and I will tell them how you looked after us and how you took care of us and that you should be true. When you come to the United Nations, how America has to give you the proper. And he was trying to schmaltz him, I'm going to quote you now. This is from an interview I had with George. This is 6:30 p.m. Still, it's the summer, so it's still Shabbos afternoon. Idi Amin says to him, for you to get out of here alive, it'll take a miracle. George's wife, Rivka, a real Minashim Tzidkanios, a great woman. She was trying to be mechazik people. She had a munah. She was really trying to get everyone's spirits up. All the air went out of that balloon. So the Israelis who didn't understand English are also, what did he say? What did he say? George said to me, he says, I didn't have the heart. I couldn't translate those words. That was the point where we'd given up hope. We thought chances are we're all going to die tomorrow morning when he said that. He said, I couldn't translate it for the Israelis. Why should I take away from them? One other fact. Remember the retired Air Force colonel? George and Renee became friendly with them. And he said to them, listen, if our boys come, I don't know how it can happen, but if they do, guys, whatever you do, you get to the bathroom. Crawl, don't run, crawl, but get to the bathroom. They said, why? He said, look around this room. There's carpet, mattresses, blankets. This place is a tinderbox. This place will go up in fire. There's going to be fire here. You get to the bathroom, it's a cement floor. At least there's a chance that if a bullet or something hits, it stops at that point. It's not going to burn. And they remembered what he'd said to him, what he'd said to them. So what happens? Go back. The 2 Ugandan soldiers must have been thinking to themselves, what in the world? There's no way he's coming 12:39. They get out and they try to stop the Mercedes and try to stop the team that's going to the hostages. Yoni puts the silencer on his gun. Dum, dum. He kills one of those soldiers, the Ugandans. The other gets out of the way. The one who got out of the way gets up with his machine gun and starts shooting at them. One of the Israeli boys in the Range Rover shoots back. He kills that one. But now with that noise from the machine gun, they think their cover's blown. Yoni says, "Fly this thing!" And they fly the extra half kilometer. They get there. There's three goals. Number one, remember we said there are two entrances. There's going to be two terrorists on the east entrance, two terrorists on the west. So there's a group of guys from the Range Rovers and the Mercedes. Each has to get that stage one. Get those 4 terrorists. Remember we said there's a VIP lounge? That's where the others sleep. After we get stage 1, if God helps us, you run in and get to the VIP lounge. We got to get them before they come out and shoot grenades or start killing the hostages. Stage 3, after we take care of the VIP lounge, we got to there's a stairwell. Remember they had the architectural blueprint. There's a stairwell, and we got to get upstairs. Before the Ugandan soldiers come down and start shooting hostages, we got to get upstairs and neutralize the Ugandan soldiers so they don't get to the hostages. Those are the 3 stages. What happens? In this, Yoni gave his life. An airport, as you know, for the most part is glass. It's not walls, it's glass on the outside. So you need someone who can stay out on the tarmac and be coordinating everything with the earpiece, telling these guys to watch out for this and that. Because one's going on the other side of the building, the west entrance, the other's going on this side of the building, the east entrance. Yoni gave his life. He was a dead duck sitting out there on the tarmac, but being able to tell them if someone's coming out of the VIP lounge, if soldiers are going to be coming down through the stairwell. What happened? Stage 1 worked. They killed the 4 terrorists. There's a gunfight on both sides of the building. Stage 2, the terrorists coming out of the VIP lounge got out of the VIP lounge before Israel could get there. This man, they referred to him as Carlos. He was a Palestinian who was living in Peru for a number of years. He takes a grenade and he lets go of the grenade. Now, the grenade itself did not kill people. It created terrible fire. Remember how we said it's a tinderbox? Guys, over there? Look over here. It's a tinderbox. What happens? There are 3 of the hostages who are there. They're burning up. It's on fire. The blankets are on fire. The Israelis had bullhorns. They thought of everything. They had bullhorns. This is the IDF. Everyone stay down. Stay down. Anyone that moves will shoot. But they're on fire. One of the people on fire, his name was Jean-Jacques Mimouni. A very nice young man. He originally was a Sephardic Jew, came from Morocco to Israel. Jean-Jacques, the whole week, was like serving the other hostages before he would eat. He was always telling people jokes, telling them to keep up their spirits. He's on fire. He gets up and he starts running. He took 7 bullets. All our bullets. He was killed by friendly fire. They did a post-mortem on the raid, and they said if we could do it again, we would have done the same thing. You see a guy running at you in his 20s with dark pigmentation, you think it's one of the terrorists. So we killed him. Number 2, a woman. There were immigrants there's a short window at the end of Brezhnev's regime of the USSR where what Elie Wiesel referred to as the prisoners of silence, where Russian Jews were allowed to come to Israel during a short window. There was a family by the name of Borachovich. Ida Borachovich is shot. She's killed. They neutralized the 3 terrorists in the VIP lounge. They get to the stairwell before the Ugandan soldiers, who were just shocked, who didn't move right away. They got to the stairwell. They throw some grenades in there, and then the rest of the Ugandan soldiers give up. Remember what we talked about, that it's a tinderbox? And that the Carfunkel's got to get to the bathroom? They ran to the bathroom. They hear shooting. They hear gunfire. The door of the bathroom opens. because it's on carpet, so I have to do this up here. They hear two boots. They're hiding. They're like this. Can't say Tehillim, it's a bathroom, but they're thinking Tehillim. They don't know. Is this going to be the last minute of their life? Is this one of the Ugandan soldiers and they're going to be killed? Or is this an IDF soldier and they're going to be saved? They hear the following words. And Rivka said to me, as long as I live, I'll never forget these words. Shavua Tov, we're here to bring you home. Shavua Tov, we're here to bring you home. They look up, it's a member of the Sayeret Matkal with a kippah on his head. The place has been secured. The second plane had a whole series of Peugeot pickup trucks. How are you going to get the hostages the whole kilometer from the old terminal to the new terminal? The Israeli soldiers sit on the banks, on the sides of the pickup trucks, so that if the snipers, like the sniper that shot Yoni during this mission and killed him, if a sniper, a Ugandan soldier from the control tower, God forbid we don't want that a hostage should be killed, we'll take the bullet, we'll die for the hostage. And the pickup trucks are going back and forth, bringing them onto the plane. And thank God no one was shot. Thank God. What happens? They get on the plane. Remember we said the goal was 60 minutes? From touchdown to takeoff, 51 minutes. 51 minutes. There's a young man, Ilan Hartuv. He starts coming. He says, you can't go. My mother's not here. My mother's not here. Because they'd done count after count. They spoke to the Air France pilot. Make sure that every member of the crew was here. He made sure every member of the crew was there. Well, where's your mom? Where's your mom? She's in the hospital. We can't go to the hospital. We have to leave. We can't. We're sorry. What happened? They go to Nairobi to fuel. While they take off, the other soldiers are there. Remember the promise they made to Kenya? Remember the promise they made to the Kenyans? They brought in the RPGs and they took out every one of the MiGs. They blew up. They kept their word. It meant they risked their lives. It meant that things are going to go a lot longer, but they did it. They promised it. And they take off. At this moment, after they've landed in Kenya, someone they became friendly with, one of the hostages, his name was Dr. Pasco Cohn. Dr. Cohn was hit by a stray bullet in the thigh. Now, you don't die by taking a bullet in the thigh. But on the plane, they couldn't stop the bleeding. They took him off, and tragically, he died on the table. He bled to death. Not from the bullet, but apparently he had a coagulation, a clotting factor. They couldn't get him to stop the bleeding. He's the fourth of the Kedoshim. Yoni, who was shot on the tarmac, commanding the raid. Jean-Jacques Mimouni, Ida Borachovich, and Pasco Cohn. What happens? At 3:30 a.m., I apologize, they call up the Kenyan Prime Minister, the head of Kenya, and they tell him what's going on. It's 2:30 in the morning. He says to them, what did you say? Stop it! I don't want to hear. You didn't call me. Get them out of our country in the next 90 minutes. Get them refueled and get them out of here. And he slams the phone down. Until 40 years later when it became declassified, officially he never knew anything about this. They take off. They have to go, remember, over enemy territory. They got to fly under radar now for 8 hours to get back to Israel. At 3:30 a.m., the British Broadcasting Company, the BBC, is already starting to say, we think there were Israeli commandos, there was a raid, the hostages have been freed, and they're in the air at this point. What happens? They're scared to death. They could get shot out. These monster planes are a dead duck. They're a sitting duck. They're praying that they make it back. Renee said to me, Everyone was given earplugs because there's monster noise from these big planes. You can't talk. We're going under radar. You can't talk despite the noise of the engines. They're holding straps. It's not like you're flying a commercial airlines. You're in a cargo flight. They're holding straps. She would have thought the soldiers would be ecstatic. They're standing, they don't know the name of this man, but they're standing over this dead soldier who's wrapped. And all they look at is the eyes of the other soldiers. And all they can see is the other soldiers for hours are standing looking at the body. He must have been like a father figure. They would find out who he is, who he was. They get over international. They get out of Africa through Eritrea. They're now in the Yam Suf. The pilot gets on the plane. Shuki Shani did not fly them back. It was a different pilot that flew them back. He gets on the plane. He says, we're not safe, but we're over international airspace. The soldiers broke out immediately into Am Yisrael Chai. And all of the hostages and all the soldiers crying are singing together Am Yisrael Chai. It's 5 a.m. in the morning, which in America is 10 p.m. Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin gets on the phone and he calls President Ford, President of the United States. He says, Mr. President, I'm sure you've heard rumors, etc. I want to apologize, you haven't heard it from me directly. He says, I don't even know if they're going to make it back safe. We think they're over international airspace. We're on radio silence, so we ourselves don't even know. What happened? What happened? He tells him the story. President Ford responds, Mr. Prime Minister, you have just given the United States of America the greatest birthday present we could have ever asked for. What did he mean by that? Mr. Prime Minister, you have just given the United States of America the greatest birthday present we could have ever asked for. Because he stood up to terror. He stood up to terror. They make it back home safe. Tragically for the few families, they were notified. All those who were going to France, the French consulate was there. No one had a passport. They were all held, taken by the terrorists. They were given temporary passports. It was July 4th. The Americans, the Carfunkels, had to wait till July 5th. No American was there. I want to tell you two things that happened on Sunday morning, July 5th. When he gets back to the United States, there's a whole group of Jews from all over New York that are there to greet him at JFK. A whole group of Jews. And his father, who's a teacher at the yeshiva in Brooklyn, he quotes a verse from Kapitel Nun Gimel. He quotes David HaMelech. He says, by the way, did any of you say V'yitan Lecha on Saturday night? If you say V'yitan Lecha, you say this every Motzei Shabbos. Podeh b'shalom nafshi mikrav, ki rabim hayu imadi. King David says, my life has been redeemed. I'm safe. I'm alive in peace. Not because of my schus, not because of any benefit of mine, but because the whole nation was praying for me. The whole nation was davening for me. He says to his son, that I live to see my son again. It is only because the last week the Jewish world was fasting. The Jewish world were having Tehillim rallies. The Jewish world was davening, taking upon themselves extra mitzvahs. You're here because of the schus of the Rabbi. Yal, do you have the Begin speech? Monday morning, there is a special session at the Knesset held. All of Israel, most people didn't have TVs in 1976. If you had a TV, you watched it. If you didn't have a TV, whether you were at work or at home, everyone was listening to this to find out all of the details. Prime Minister Rabin, former military man, very stoic, gives a short speech, a standing ovation. He invites the opposition leader, Menachem Begin, to address the Knesset. They brought Begin with them for Shabbos because he wanted the support if they decided on this mission, not just of those in the government, but the opposition as well. And Begin supported him. He says, it doesn't matter whether I agree or disagree. This is a time when the Jewish nation is at stake. The future of the nation is at stake. This is not a time for partisan politics. And Begin supported Rabin. He supported him on the decision to negotiate with terrorists on Tuesday and Wednesday, and he supported him on Shabbos to risk a mission that would possibly kill our best soldiers and get the hostages killed. He invited Begin to speak. Guys, this speech will go down possibly as the greatest Jewish speech of the 20th century. This is something that is spoken about in history books. We don't have time to go through all of it. I'm just going to quote you one part of the speech. After he spoke about Yonatan Netanyahu, who was the son of his friend, this time, the first time the world hears the word Yoni Netanyahu. Do you know, I know two people who were named after Yoni. I was told that over 600 Jewish boys were named Yoni after this young man who didn't have a chance to get married, to have a family, but in memory of him and what he risked. He speaks about him and who he was. And listen to this phrase. He says, not God, the Ribono Shel Olam, has not given us for 2,200 years, since the time of the Chashmonaim, since the time of the Maccabees, we have not had the schus of being able to stand up and defend ourselves. It has not been 2,200 years. And he refers to the group of the Sayeret and the Tzanchanim, Chashmonaim risen anew. And then he turns and he gives profound respect to Prime Minister Rabin, Defense Minister Peres, and the responsibility on their shoulders. That was the second part that we're skipping. The third part, and you have to know one thing. If any of you for history or for Jewish history, if you do a report or a study on Menachem Begin, his whole family was wiped out. After Hitler broke the pact with Stalin, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, most Jews, their whole historical retrospect or perspective was World War I, when the German soldiers were much nicer to people, to the civilians, than the Russian soldiers. And most Jews stayed in the German-controlled area. They didn't want to go into the Russians. He did. His family was wiped out. He survived. Please understand that context. And I want to quote you his speech, word for word, this part of the speech. Not 30 years ago, not 30 years ago, did we go through a selection at the hands of the Germans, when a finger to the right on the platforms of Auschwitz, at the hands of Dr. Mengele and the German doctors, meant death, and a finger to the left meant slave labor. Then, there was no one to save them. Now, he said, we declare for all to hear, never again. Our door, our generation, has taken a shvuah, an oath, consecrated in the blood of our slain mothers, in the blood of our butchered fathers, in the blood of asphyxiated babies. Never, never again, with the help of the Ribono Shel Olam, will the blood of the Jew be shed with impunity. Never again, with the help of God Almighty, will Jewish honor be easy prey. Let the world know, if anyone, anywhere, is persecuted, is humiliated, is threatened, is abducted, or is in any way endangered because she is a Jew, because he is a Jew, then with God Almighty's help, Israel will marshal all of its strength to come to their aid. to bring them to the safe haven of our homeland. This, he said, this is the message of Entebbe. In the aftermath of this raid, the Americans, the Germans, and the British all created units in the model Sayeret Matkal. Guys, your teachers appreciate this. I don't expect you to. But until 9/11, for 25 years, from 1976 till 9/11, people were free. People could fly. The transit of the world was not controlled due to the fear of terrorism. Badr, when the German people found out that 30 years after the Holocaust, it was Germans who were involved with the Palestinians making selection between Jew and Gentile, the liberal progressive part of the society that supported Baader-Meinhof turned on them. They were enraged. Had we not learned the lessons of the Holocaust 30 years later, Badr himself saw it was over. He thought he was going to be emancipated on Sunday. He ended up committing suicide in prison, and that, for all intents and purposes, was the end of Baader-Meinhof. But the world followed that little country's example. And until 9/11, for 25 years, human beings of this planet could travel, felt safe. And even though in the UN, all the Russian-backed and Arab nations condemned, how dare you violate the sovereignty of Uganda, how dare you go send a military force into another country, and they condemned them. Every Western nation called up Israel and wanted to learn from them. Those people are alive. The children of the Entebbe hostages today measure close to 1,000. The children and grandchildren of those people. The children and grandchildren of the soldiers who survived a mission that they did not expect to come back from. They were told, prepare yourselves, you may not be coming back. Those children as well are in the hundreds today. The malaise and depression that we spoke about, that the Jewish nation, in the aftermath of Munich and the Yom Kippur War, this took us out of the depression. This gave us hope. This gave us pride. And this gave us a reason to renew our building of the Jewish homeland. I asked you, why was Bibi Netanyahu not at your July 4th barbecue? Why wasn't he even in the state of Israel? Because 40 years after the death of his brother, he went to the scene. He commemorated his brother's death. And he thanked the Almighty, he thanked the Ribbon Shalom for the miracle of Entebbe, where a small force went 3,800 kilometers and they saved their brothers and sisters. Kol Yisrael Reliving Zelazeh, Pidyon Shvuyim, at its greatest, most concrete way. This is the great miracle, the great story of the modern day Maccabees, of the modern day Chashmonaim, as Menachem Begin referred to them, the story of Entebbe. Happy Hanukkah, good Chodesh, Am Yisrael Chai.